Hey, I thought I'd just be easier to make a video to respond to this. And sorry about the delay. I just took a good solid month there during the lockdown to get the site ready for this new year, and I've just been kind of burned out a little bit getting everything fantasy football done, and there's no sports anyway, so that's why it took me a while to get back to you. First things first is I actually do agree with you. We definitely could do the salary cap in the way that you mentioned. I believe that I even recommended that as a possible situation that we might face this year if we have an owner who's got financial hardships due to the pandemic. We could again do what you mentioned, but as a scaled down version. Where again maybe we all just put in $20 this year because somebody needs to buy groceries and their hours have been cut. We could just kind of prorate that as a percentage of the cap. Again, we could do what you propose to have the salary cap more accurately reflect what's going on in the NFL. But let's talk about why I decided not to go that route. The first thing to remember is that my priority right now is to stop this churn of owners that we have every year. If we had the same 16 owners for the past 4 or 5 years, I would probably do and be more likely to go with what Cube recommended here. But my number one priority right now is to stop the constant churn of one or two owners every year. Every year we lose an owner or two. There are some reasons for that, and we can get into that. So basically, these teams that have these constantly rotating owners, they're really depleted. They've been mismanaged for years. There's awful contracts, overpaid players. There's just a lack of talent. If there is a talented player, the contract is so overexpensive that there's no trade value in it. So it's my opinion that it's just my opinion generally, but it's also for the sake of any new owner that comes into the league, that we have just a vibrant, open, robust free agent market. In a 16 team league and a 2 round draft with no defensive players, only offensive players, the draft is going to be very, very supplemental in how any new owner can rebuild one of these teams. And it's going to take years of effort to get these teams to be competitive with the rest of the league. So, in my opinion, we've just got to have that robust free agent market every single year. Or we could do other things where we remember how we went through the expansion draft. Maybe we don't want to do anything inside the game that is going to be unfair to the other owners. For example, we don't want every owners to maybe have I don't know what you would even call it, kind of like an expansion draft for our shitty teams. We don't want to have, pick players off of a team or to give extra draft picks or whatever. We don't want to change anything within the game other than, again, have that robust free agent market. Now, we've done some other things with these uncompetitive teams. We've given them discounts. We're giving away a team for free this year because it is just so depleted. We want that new owner just to be able to come in and say, you know what, I'm not going to be competitive, so I'll just run the team, just to run the team. And then hopefully next year we can give them a 50% discount. We're looking at 2 years of just getting full money into the pot from one of these teams because it's been so mismanaged. Basically, all of my decisions that I made really just geared around stopping that constant churn of AFL ownership. So obviously now let's look at what the salary cap is. Obviously, the NFL, the salary cap is a percentage of their revenue. It has been going up every year, and it may not always. That's the point. In 2000, I think 2011 to 2012, it was 120 million, and then the next year it was 120.6 million. So that year it was almost flat, essentially flat. But be careful what you wish for. With this pandemic, their NFL revenue is going to decrease. Stadiums aren't going to be full. We just have to expect the worst. They could have everything from not even having a season, zero revenue, to having shorter season, 10 games, 9 games. So that is going to impact the NFL revenue, which is going to impact the salary cap. in a decrease. So be careful what you wish for. If we do what Cube recommended here, we might go from $140 salary cap down to $120. So that's going to completely go against what Cube is proposing. And again, this might happen over the course of several years. Who knows how long it's going to take to get a vaccine? And there are other factors that might implicate, declining revenue in the NFL. Players are getting injured, and there's the whole concern about head injuries. And what if, God forbid, a player dies on the field? Is that going to impact their revenue? It just might. And, sooner or later, the NFL might go through a decade of declining revenue, which would be declining salary cap. Be careful what you wish for when you want to model our salary cap after, the NFL. Now let's go back to what the salary cap in the AFL represents. That number really just represents the amount of money owners are willing to bet. The AFL fantasy football is gambling. This is a gambling league. Our cap space is how much are we willing to bet. So way back in the origins of our league, the idea was to have a 1-to-1 ratio of dollars that I pay a player and dollars that I put into the pot. I believe at that time, we like to bet. And I believe in 2005, the NFL salary cap was, I think, $80. So we just said, let's have an $80 salary cap. There were 12 teams. That's a pretty good bet. I got Peyton Manning for $20. So that's literally me putting a $20 bill into the pot and having 3 $20 bills remaining to fill out the rest of my team. And then, too, we did have a dynamic salary cap where it would increase every year. So we were always 1/1,000,000th of what the NFL was. Finally, then we crossed that $100 mark. Owners, we're not all rich. And we just said, hey, why don't we just cap it here at $100? That's enough money. So that's when we decided to go from a dynamic to a static salary cap. And a few years later, we rolled out some more contract structure, so we kind of bumped it up to 140 where it has remained. The point is our salary cap is just the bet. So that's what we need to ask ourselves. Again, if we do what Cube proposes, 5 years from now, I might pay Peyton Manning Jr. $20 to be on my team in-game, but I'm only putting in $16.87 into the pot. Again, it was always the commissioner's intent that there was a 1-to-1 ratio of the money that I pay for my player goes directly into the pot. It's a bet. How much are we willing to bet? Just to address some of the other points in there that I do disagree with, I'll start with the last line first. Every fantasy league cherry picks. Are they just a draft league? Well, then they're just drafting, or they're just cherry picking the draft. Are they an auction league, but they draft rookies only? Well, those are the two things that they cherry pick. Are they a draft league and they have a salary cap? Well, they cherry pick that. Do they allow tags? Well, we've cherry picked a lot. The NFL is way too complicated that we can't duplicate everything. So therefore, we've cherry picked some things. Also, there are just some limitations to what the website can do, what can and can't be automated. Based on the complexity of the NFL, limitations of the website, limitations of my programming skills to automate things, we've had to cherry pick some things. There will always be things that are picked, and there will always be cherries that are not picked. So, that's just the nature of it. Of course, things are going to be cherry picked, and not all things will be. So, speaking of contracts, we all know that every NFL contract is different, and we have no way to simulate that within the AFL. So since year one, we've come up with that same standard where player salary will increase by 20% every year. That isn't all true, in all cases in the NFL. And obviously, a NFL team's salary doesn't just automatically increase 20% from the year to the next. There are players who retire. There are players who get cut. There are players who decide to move on or not to re-sign, or all of these variables. And the thing is, too, is that NFL salary cap is not there to balance any backloaded contracts. Now, I'm just going to look here at J.J. Watt's contract. I just chose him at random. The first year, if we look at his total yearly cash, he makes almost 11 million. That was 2014. Look at 2015. That almost doubled. We don't do that in the AFL, where we almost double the salary. Well, then the next year in 2016, his yearly cash was almost halved. Now, did he restructure? I don't know why that is. And then the year 2017, it remained flat. And then it went up by about 10% every year for the following the following few years. So the point is most of these contracts are backloaded. And this is just a strange. I just chose this randomly, where he went from 10 million to almost 20 million, back down to 10 million, and then steadily up to 17 and a half over the next 4 or 5 seasons. So that is a typical contract. They are just backloaded. Again, the salary cap in the NFL is a percentage of the revenue, and in the AFL, it is just how much we're willing to bet. The salary cap is not supposed to balance increased players' cost. That is not the purpose of the salary cap. Player costs will increase. That is the way the NFL typically structures those contracts. That's why we do it as well. They don't necessarily plan that, the salary cap is going to increase by 13%, therefore I should give my players 13% increases year over year after year. No, because they don't know how much the salary cap is going to increase. So again, the cap is just what it is, either a bet or a percentage of the NFL revenue, and does not exist to balance increased player costs. That is the whole purpose of the increased player costs, is to force those teams to break up every once in a while, to have cap casualties, to not be able to afford a free agent's demands. And that allows that player to leave and go to another team elsewhere that might have the space. I think Cube is looking at it through just an individual team perspective, but there's a bigger picture where we want roster movement. We want this cycle of players playing for a team for a few years, getting free agency, and moving on. Or getting that restructured deal where they've got that long-term guarantee of money, or get that tag and get that top 5 or top 10 money. The point is these players are always looking to increase their money, and the answer isn't necessarily to increase the cap to get the players more money. Sometimes the players leave and they go elsewhere to get the more money. That's how they typically get those bigger contracts, is they go somewhere else. So again, I completely disagree with Cube's statement that a salary cap should balance out increased player costs. So if we move on and start talking about league minimums, the NFL, the league floor is 89% of the salary cap. We've obviously we've never literally had a floor. We've technically had one. You could probably say that over our typical average roster over the past few years has probably been 20 players. So if we have a minimum of $1 per player, then technically our floor has been $20. Anyway, the reason now that the NFL is doing is they are increasing that league minimum. That's really not going to affect their floor. They're still going to have to spend that 89% of their salary cap. However, that will affect our floor and it will raise it. Now, again, I said my number one priority is to stop that churn of ownership from year to year. So I don't want to set a floor. I don't want to mandate that a team or an owner who's picking up one of these shitty teams has to spend $130 or $125. I just don't want to do that. That's not make new owners stay around. So we can still raise our floor by increasing our league minimum without necessarily, again, having to specify a floor. And then 2, as an example, I made it to the AFL Bowl with a $78.27 team salary, which was 56% of the salary cap. So I think that's crucial for us. If we can Show these new owners that you can be competitive by spending $80, $90. Again, maybe we'll give you that 50% discount one year. You can spend $90 in cap, be competitive, only put 45 into the pot, maybe even make some, win your division, win $180 or something like that. I just think it's imperative that we keep our floor really, really low, but at the same time, we can increase our player minimums. Again, when I say I made these changes to the AFL, it is because of the collective bargaining agreement that was reached in March. So think of this. The salary cap is a percentage of the revenue. And up until this current collective bargaining agreement, that was 48% of the revenue. So the players got 48% of the revenue, the whatever 1,300 players in the NFL, and then the 32 owners got 52%. Well, now the new collective bargaining agreement, the players got an extra percent of the revenue. So they're now at a 49% to the players, 51% to the owners. So basically, the players gave themselves a 1% raise. Again, if the salary cap were to increase, if that revenue were to increase, so they negotiated this raise 2 weeks before a global pandemic hit. Although they got a raise in percentage, they might still make less money because it is a percentage of the revenue. So we've got to keep that in mind, that we're increasing the roster size. Those player minimums are increasing, but do we want to even further handicap ourselves by having even less money next year or the following year or the year after? I just don't think that's the route to go in a gambling environment. So now then, knowing that our players are getting raises, I just made the executive decision to avoid an AFL shitstorm that always happens anytime something with. And I thought, the players are slowly going to make more money over the course of the 10 years of this CBA. So I just thought it would be somewhat fair to increase the salary cap. Again, however many years ago, we all voted against that, except it would just be under my proposal, it would only be $1 a year until 2030, until we reach that nice round number of $150. So a few times now I've talked about the unintended consequences of actually have a salary cap that gets lower and lower over the course of either 1 year or several years. The other unintended consequence, and I think this is a more important thing to focus on, is that there will be less players in the free agent pool. Again, it is just my personal belief that a healthy, vibrant free agent market is the key to a competitive dynasty fantasy football league. I believe that the NFL believes that as well, to have that parity within the NFL. Obviously, there are the Patriots of the NFL, and there are the Washington Dan Snyders of the NFL, who rarely have a winning season, let alone make the playoffs. There are going to be those AFL owners that are very, very good and who are also kind of bad. The problem is the Dan Snyders of the NFL leave after 2 or 3 years, and we just can't afford that anymore. So we've got to look at keeping our free agent market full of players and with player turnover. That's got to be a key aspect over the next 5 years of the AFL, at least. I mean, and it always has been. That's how you achieve parity in a fantasy football league. So if we were to avoid a decreased salary cap due to the pandemic, and we were to increase it by a certain percentage, and we were only increasing minimum salaried players, those percentages by a smaller percentage, then we've given more cap space to the owners. Let's say the salary cap increases 10%, but the average of the minimum player increase on each team is only 5%. Well, now that owner has an extra 5%. So what's going to happen? Well, those teams are going to retain more players. So, again, if we decide to go that route, and the second unintended consequence is the retainment of more players, well, we need to come up with other mechanisms which will then allow more players to pass into free agency. Now, there could be a dozen different things we do. Maybe instead of those restructured contracts, those players playing at 70% of their previous contract price, maybe we raise that to 85%. Maybe we do other things to increase the performance bonuses or add workout bonuses. The point is, again, if we increase the salary cap, that's ultimately what's going to happen is there will be more player retention, which means there will be a less vibrant free agent market, which will mean we have less parity in the league, which means it'll be harder to turn a bad team around, or at least it will take longer, and then therefore we will have more owners quitting. We've really got to be careful in doing that. In conclusion, I made these series of changes again. And again, yes, I did cherry pick. So I cherry picked some of the new CBA because that's what we do as a fantasy league. We cherry pick those things that seem to make sense. Again, we decided to increase the rookie wage scale. That's hard to say fast. We've increased the league minimums, and we've kept the salary cap the same, and that's going to again just create more player turnover, and that's the key to creating parity in the league, in my opinion. Again, Cube, that's not a bad way to run a salary cap. Again, I kind of proposed something similar again, just for this year in case of the recession, the impending recession due to the pandemic, and if owners are having financial troubles. That's my number one concern is we're not going to lose an owner due to this pandemic. My second concern then is we need to stop this constant turnover of owners within our league, and hopefully we can do that by creating a very robust free agent market. Again, I would rather do things like outside the league, give them a discount on their entrance fees, than do things inside the league where we're going to force some teams to give up players to an expansion style draft just to make these teams more competitive. So keeping that salary cap constant will hopefully always just create that player turnover, which will A, lead to parity, B, keep these owners in the league long term. Thanks.